today's episode of She Has a PhD, the podcast where we celebrate extraordinary women in science. I'm Isabel Kashtain, your host for today. Last week, we heard Dr. Naama Kanarek's fascinating story. Today, she's back to have a short conversation on metabolism and nutrition in cancer. Naama, welcome back.
Thank you.
Before we delve in, let's start with definitions. Starting with metabolism, how would you define metabolism in simple terms?
Okay. Sometimes it's hard to define metabolism just because it's about everything. But if I try to really boil it down to what it is, it's everything you need to happen in a cell, in a live cell, to keep it alive, to make it happen.
Thank you. Okay, that's clear, I think.
I think it's very broad because metabolism is very broad. Like, people think about different functions of the cell, but for everything that the cell does, you need metabolites. So, for example, we use our eyes to see, right? For that, there is some transfer of some information that requires some energy. To feed that energy, we need metabolism. But it's not just energy. It's also, if you have an immune cell that needs to divide, to grow, that cell needs to build up this mass. We call it the biomass, right? To build up that mass, we need the building blocks. Those building blocks are metabolites. And so we need metabolism to create those metabolites. We need metabolism to put them together to build whatever it is we're building: DNA, proteins, membranes of the cell, the cell walls, that's everything. So this is why metabolism is just, it feeds into every single function of the cell.
And I think it might be also easier to understand once you go into your research, or since it's such a broad term. Yeah. So you are studying metabolism, but how are you studying metabolism in your research?
So our specific question that we try to address is mostly how cells respond when suddenly their nutritional environment is not as good. So let's say a cell is happily floating around in the blood, and the cell has everything it needs, right? There's sugar and protein and everything that is enough to actually feed that function of that cell. And all of a sudden, that cell gets to a place or environment, or let's say the person is not eating enough, or something happened, and that nutritional environment is not as good. So just imagine if you're coming from a place that has a lot of food and supermarkets everywhere, and all of a sudden you land in a desert, okay? You need to respond. So the cells are the same. If something changes around them, they need to respond. So first they need to sense it. Hey, something is wrong. We don't have the same level of nutrients we had before. And then they need to make some tough decisions. How are we still going to support our life, our function, if we don't have enough nutrients? What can we build and still make, and what should we just not, just to save for the most critical functions? And so all this sensing and decision making is something quite complicated in the cell, and changes between cells and changes between environments. And I find it fascinating. And so how do we do this? Usually we introduce cells with some challenges, some nutritional challenges. And then we ask, what do the cells do now to respond to it? And so in the lab, the approaches that we can apply, there's many genetic approaches that we can try and ask what genes are involved in this decision making. There are many biochemical approaches that we can actually define what is happening in the sense of that decision making in the cell. We can use the tools that we have to map those responses. And then we also have a very strong part of the lab that we're doing what is called metabolomics. It's a super cool method where we can see the components of the cells that are as small as the nutrients themselves. And that is a very powerful tool, and that is very enabling in the science that we do, because we can actually detect different changes, for example, in a specific nutrient. So let's say there's a specific vitamin that now we don't have enough of. We can detect that vitamin and see it, and we can detect what is happening to that vitamin and what is happening to the functions that this vitamin is supporting. Because it's all nutrients and it's all very, very small and very hard to detect using other methods. So having this method in the lab is something that is very strong, and it strongly supports what we are asking, what we are doing.
And I've read, going through your research, that you now going a bit into scientific terms that I need your help to define it for our listeners, but that you study folate sensing and cell homeostasis. Is that right? Can you
Yeah.
define those terms?
So folate is a vitamin. Folic acid is something that every family that had a pregnancy is very, very, very well aware of. Women are encouraged to take folic acid when they're pregnant. The reason is that this vitamin is critical for the fast growth of the fetus, of the embryo. But not only pregnant women need to take folate. Basically, we all do. And we're all lucky because we live here, and in most of the countries, most of the Western countries, folate is being added to flour. And so if you ate your cereal this morning or a roll or something, you already have enough folate for the day. You don't need to worry about it. It's called folate fortification. It's something that really helps to make sure that the community, that our, like in the population level, we do have enough folate. And then of course pregnant women take pills on top of that. And so before that, back in the middle of the previous century, many of the birth defects were the result of not having enough folate in the system of the mother and not being able to support the growth of the embryo all the way through. And then that failure of supporting the growth all the way through was often the result of lack of folate. Today, we know it's really important for prevention of anemia also, and because cancer cells also grow very fast and need a lot of folate, we can actually target the folate for the cancer and treat cancer with this, which of course creates challenges to other cells, right? As I just said that all cells need folate and we need folate all the time. And then I say in cancer patients, we actually target this and take it away. So we take it away for all the cells, not just the cancer. And it's a pay that it's a price that we pay for treating the cancer patients with this. But it is working, so we do it.
Okay, what about cell homeostasis? What is it and how do you study
What is it? Okay. Cell homeostasis, and sometimes we actually think more about whole organism homeostasis, is the balance of the needs and what can be provided in terms of, like, let's say, one or more nutrients. So if we take the folate as an example, let's say there is some level of folate in the whole body, and for some reason there is malnutrition or some other reason to not have enough folate. And then the body has to keep the levels of folate as balanced as possible. So to take folate maybe from organs that don't need it as much and give it to the organs that need it a little bit more. All these decisions to keep things balanced, it is true in the cell level and it is true in the organism level. But the point will be to make some decision to distribute the nutrient, whatever nutrient it is, to where it is most needed. And sometimes it also means to try and take up more from the environment. If there is a cell and suddenly there's a drop in a nutrient, oftentimes what the cells do is that they try to increase their capacity of taking up that nutrient. So there are different tricks, there are different ways to respond to the fact that, oh, I don't have enough of this nutrient. And these are super interesting to me. Like, how do the cells make those decisions? And when they make the wrong decision, so they channeled a nutrient that is very, very low, they channel it to the wrong place, they might die. And so for when it's a cell, it's interesting. When it's a whole organism, it is much more complicated, of course, but it is also very interesting because our bodies also make these decisions. When we don't eat enough protein, our muscle is starting to fall apart, for example. So all these things happen in both these levels, and I think both are very interesting.
Well, I'm biased because I'm also a biologist, but I find it very interesting too, although it's really not my area of research. You mentioned nutrition and you mentioned cancer, and as probably our listeners are aware, nutrition in cancer is quite a hot topic these days. So as we know, I think this is set in stone. Good nutrition is important for everyone, of course. But according to research, it seems to be particularly important for people with cancer. And also, cancer itself and cancer treatments may cause side effects that affect nutrition, from my understanding, even potentially causing malnutrition, which is something I hadn't thought about before preparing for this conversation with you. You have been working in this space for quite some years now, and in 2020, you published a review in Nature titled Dietary Modifications for Enhanced Cancer Therapy, where you reviewed research about how the modification of several nutrients in the diet can alter the efficacy of cancer therapies. At least that was my interpretation. Can you summarize the current state of the literature for us and the main messages that you shared in that publication?
Sure. So first, I just want to really clarify that I'm not a nutrition expert at all. I study metabolism, and from that perspective, I can make some opinions. But first, they're quite personal opinions. It is not the main topic of my research. I just find it interesting, and I think it's really, really important. Um, I can tell you that the literature is changing. What is still developing are preclinical studies that will support very clear recommendations and very clear answers. These happen, and there are some that are just fantastic and were very, very well done and gave us a lot of information, but they're still not enough. They're not comprehensive because we need more from more cancer types and for more different treatments and the combination of cancer types and treatments and also personal habits. Um, the preclinical studies are done on mice. There's going to be a gap between the mice and the human. And so, as far as there is more and more information about the things we should probably avoid, the things we need to pay attention to, and I can mention a couple in a minute, I really want to emphasize that there is no clear answer. Oh, you're cancer patients with this type of cancer, with this treatment, this is what you should eat. No. We can probably say you're a cancer patient that's getting a metabolic drug, maybe don't eat this or that. And it will be usually just a recommendation because we don't have very strong data. It will usually be just in a very clear context of one treatment or another that are metabolic treatments. So we do need to remember that it is only still in the stages where we are building that experience, we're building that advice is still not a very, very clear black and white advice. It's very important to say that. I think it's also important to say that when right now, when cancer patients go to the clinic, many clinicians don't really consider the diet as part of the treatment. They consider the diet as a way to support the biomass of the patient. So the first goal is just for the patient not to lose too much weight and for the patient not to be subject to what we call cachexia, which is usually in later stages if the disease is mass loss. And that it's important. It's not that it's not, but sometimes it can also go against some of the treatments that are given. And this is where people started to pay more attention to it and started to say, hey, we have a problem here. We can tell our patients, how about you wake every morning and eat like a Nutella sandwich while we give them a drug that is based on trying to not activate insulin. And insulin is activated by sugar. So what happened was that we give this drug that is inhibiting insulin, and like it's not really inhibiting insulin itself, but it is inhibiting what is happening to cells when they see insulin. And at the same time, we tell them, yeah, how about you eat this cake? How about you eat more sugary foods? Yeah, you can drink this Coke. That's okay. And then those spikes in sugar were actually going against the drug. So definitely now we are a little bit more aware. There was a fantastic preclinical study that was done in two different types of cancer that showed that if you inhibit this insulin, basically it's called signaling. It's this message to the cell that you have enough, you can grow, go for it. And without sugar, the cells are not going to grow because they need the sugar to grow. But they also need this signaling that sends the sugar and tell them you can grow, go ahead. And so trying to block that and at the same time giving sugar that will activate it basically caused loss of impact of the drug. The effect was gone. And so with the preclinical study that came out and with some clinical studies that are now ongoing, we do know that probably ketogenic diet can be helpful for some of these things. I do want to say, and maybe it's only for later to bring it up, but it is important to mention it. what has to be done is a very comprehensive study that will include also the mood and the mental state of the patients. Because mice don't eat food as comfort food. When we feed the mice that food or another, they will just consume what we give them. They don't overeat. They don't do that stuff. We use food when we celebrate, when we're sad, when we are, I don't know, like everything is around food, right? When we are cold, when we are hot, like we solve all the problems with food. And as cancer patients, on one hand, there's a lot to do with how they feel, and many of them feel nauseous or get sick, and there is a very common side effect called mucositis that really influences the mouth and the gut, and sometimes it creates problems with eating, and sometimes it creates problems with digestion and with absorption of the food. And these things are real things, are real problems, and people who go through them, they feel terrible. And so if you go through 2 weeks of feeling terrible and you can eat, and then you go through some time and maybe let's say you get another drug that is metabolic but is not making you feel terrible, you just want to have a good nice breakfast because you want to feel like a person again. So I'm just giving like one example of how what cancer patients are going through can only amplify their need of eating when they can. Can we take it away because that might compromise the impact of the drug? I don't know what's going to happen, right? So this is I think, a very urgent topic to address in this space, and I don't think we're there yet because we first need to have the biological, like dry facts about what diet can do better with what drug in what cancer and da 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 da. So all that combinatorial biology, we still don't have that information. But even if we had that information, before we can make any recommendations to patients, on top of that, we need to add information about mental state and what it does. And so we have this big gap of first, we need to have the combinatorial information about, this is what we call precision medicine, right? For a specific patient, what is the cancer? What is the general state like of nutrition and lean mass and general body mass? What is the treatment that is going to be given? Is it metabolic or not metabolic? And then start to really test what diet can be the best. But that's extremely hard work. Requires many mouse models and patients' involvement and clinical trials and a lot of things that are actually ongoing right now. They're all in the right direction, but they're still not entirely there. And still, this huge gap of mental health and connection to food is something that it makes me so hesitant to say anything that is stronger than just, how about you try to eat healthy and eat your vegetables even when you're a cancer patient? Because I don't want to say anything that will cause, for example, causing guilt feelings. It's something that can really go a long way for people. So if somebody comes and ask a question about nutrition in other contexts, if you say, you know what, you should not drink soda, it's not good for you. And then they go and one day and they have soda. They might feel guilty about it. They might feel bad about not standing to their own standard of avoiding this thing that they know is bad for them. But, they will shrug it away and they'll be fine. But if you're a cancer patient and you are dealing constantly with trying to make yourself better and trying to make yourself healthier, and this like very intense occupation in your state of your health and what are you doing today to make it better, to heal, to be cured, and then you add to this, oh, by the way, if you drink soda you're ruining everything, right? Like, and then this person will just be in a place that they just need to have a soda, they just want that, and then with that soda will come this mental place of, I'm not doing enough to cure myself. That's a lot of liability. And I don't think we're there yet. I don't think we know enough to be able to say it will be more impactful to give these people diets that are low in sugar, and then it is impactful to give them a donut. So they just feel like people, and they feel like we're on our way out of this, or they feel like I have something to look forward to, or they feel like, I don't know, they want to celebrate something, and we tell them, oh, but you can't eat cake. But I want to celebrate my daughter's birthday, and maybe it's the last birthday I'm going to celebrate with her. What will that do to a person, right? I don't know. Do we know? We don't, right? So to me, this is a very big issue that we need to deal with as a community, as a scientific community. And we'll have to work with our friends across the street at the psychology departments to really deal with it. We don't have answers.
Okay, so in summary, if I understood correctly, first of all, although the connection between nutrition and cancer is well established, researchers and medical doctors can't yet really recommend to cancer patients what to eat. Is that right?
They, in some cases, some specific cases, if a clinician has a very specific advice to a person, that's fantastic. But it will be really in a person to person basis, and it will depend a lot on a clinician and how they see it, and what they know about that patient, about that treatment. So if a cancer patient goes to a clinician, and their own physician in their relationship tells them, how about you try that, yes, I will definitely follow that advice. But we can't make broad recommendations. We can't put it in protocols yet.
Right.
There are these treatment protocols, and you look at them and they're so convoluted and they have so many details. We cannot add the diet as one of them
Right. And
yet.
what do you? Oh, yet, yeah. And
I
you
think it's going
already.
there.
I had a question for you on what the scientific community should focus on right now, but you sort of already answered. And this is to use nutrition and diet as effective strategies in the fight against cancer. So you mentioned that we should really look, again, if I understood correctly, into mental health, behavior. So we need to incorporate that in the research. Is there anything else that you would like to highlight that you really think the scientific community should focus on right now to make it effective?
I think the first focus is probably to get some answers about direct connection between specific diets and outcome of treatment. And so we will know how to match that treatment will work better with some recommendations for this diet. Knowing that the recommendation has to also be just a recommendation and not like, again, not to pile it up as if you don't do it, you're failing your own treatment and all that stuff. So I think that will be the first thing that we should focus on. And it's already underway, and there are already several labs who focus on this, and I think they're doing a fantastic job. I think we are very close to that. And yes, the next step I would say is to add a lot more work in collaboration as an interdisciplinary question with we need to combine nutrition, oncology, and psychology. All of these things should come together as one big unit that we study it together as an integrated question. And so, yes, it has to be interdisciplinary science. It cannot be just me studying how cells respond to that nutritional environment or that nutritional environment. It's just not going to be enough.
Very interesting. Okay, is there a particular book or other resources you recommend to someone interested in learning about this topic? Of course, we'll make sure to add to the footnotes on this episode your articles on the matter. But is there
So
additional resources you recommend?
I can't think of a book at the moment. I think this is a little bit too young to actually have books. I would also be hesitant about a book, right? Because it is changing very fast. Even papers, like the review I wrote that came out in 2020, it's probably outdated already because this is a field that is moving fast. I know, so I want to be very careful in what I say and what I recommend, because what happened to me before after that review came out were families of cancer patients contacted me and asking me for specific advice, and I was like, no, the bottom line of that review was, I cannot give you specific advice. I'm not your physician. I have no idea what is your background. I like, no, there's no way for me to do that. But of course, when a cancer patient family is contacting you, you want to be as supportive as possible while also not giving them false advice. So the same here. I think that this field is still developing. I think that the latest paper that probably came yesterday or last week is probably going to be your best bet to get the best information. That said, sometimes not, right? Some papers come out and it takes a couple of years before we actually get the full clinical trials confirming or disproving whatever we thought. So in this case, we need to be patient and let the field develop a little bit more before we can move to actually recommendations and
I mean, I think it's an important take home message as well to be critical about, especially when I guess I experienced that myself as an Alzheimer's researcher too. But with cancer, every day it's like you see news on this miraculous thing you can do with your life to prevent or treat cancer. So at least, if anything, the take-home message I'm getting from you is to be critical and careful with advice on nutrition in cancer.
Yes. The only advice I could give there was one family came to me with their daughter had very severe pediatric cancer, and the only thing I told them is just check on the vitamin bottle that you get that it doesn't have folate in it, because we know that folate is very important to support cancer progression. And they checked, and indeed it had folate, so they just changed to a vitamin mix that doesn't have folate. It wasn't so hard to do, and I'm sure didn't change much for the nutritional supplement that the kid got, but that was the only thing I said.
Well, thank you, Naama, for sharing your expertise on these super interesting and important topics. And thank you to our listeners for tuning in for today's episodes. Check out last week's episode to hear more about Dr. Naama Kanarek and her career trajectory. She has a PhD. We'll be back soon. Until then, stay curious, stay inspired, and remember your power to positively impact the world. See you soon.